lucky that I managed to get through. I'm still feeling terrible because I've left a lot of students behind me still waiting for their chance. 720 is the number of students who got scholarships and admissions from universities all over the world and still waiting for permissions to get through the borders and continue their study. Those students, almost all of those students have lost their scholarships or admissions right now because they just simply can't just get through the borders and have to wait for the next year to start the same worsen procedures again. As you may already know, Gaza has been living under siege for the past 3 years. This siege has been imposed by the Israeli occupation force. This siege, this inhuman siege, has been blocking the sea and the borders of Gaza. Since Israel declared Gaza a hostile entity, the Palestinians in Gaza Strip has been living under terrible circumstances because Israel is controlling the 5 main borders of Gaza, which those borders, especially Karni border, which has been which is the major crossing points where most of the goods were entering leaves and enters Gaza, between Gaza and Israel. But this crossing point has been nearly seized since 3 years now. Even Rafah, which is the only border between Gaza and Egypt, is also been closed and been really partially opened once every 3 or 4 months. This border, despite being between Gaza and Egypt, is still indirectly controlled by the Israeli forces. I've been living here in the UK for 2 months now. Well, since the first day I arrived, people, after having quite some difficulties in pronouncing my name, always asking me how the situation is in Gaza. Is it as worse as we hear in the news? And do the Palestinians still see a near solution in the near future for the conflict in the Middle East area? Well, such questions bring out an overwhelming feeling of the suffering that the Palestinian people have to live in every single day just because they are citizens of Gaza. Well, I could never forget the heartache I felt every single day because when hearing on the news how many Palestinians died today in Gaza, either because they're being attacked or being under bombardment, or simply because they were patients inside hospitals waiting for their medical referrals to be approved. A lot have lost their lives simply just because they don't have the life-saving drugs, which is basically or should be one of the fundamental human rights in any country in the world. Amnesty International has recently just published a report at the beginning of this month highlighting the fact that while the majority of the Israelis have lush gardens and swimming pools and with an average consumption of water of 300 liters per capita per day, the Palestinians, or hundreds of thousands of Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip are dying because they don't have access to running water, to clean running water. Moreover, the electricity in Gaza is not a completely different story. With an average of 8 hours blackout a day, the Palestinians there, or the suffering of the Palestinians there, is even worse. I remember when I was a student at college, I had to arrange my study hours according to the daily changeable schedule of the electricity over there. And it's even worse when it comes to hospitals and healthcare centers, because thousands of patients' lives are attached to machines and equipment, which makes this irregular power supply system a serious threat to the Palestinians' life and those patients. Well, let me just say, I was talking to my family and some of my friends yesterday because Al-Adha Eid, which is an Islamic annual celebration, is just around the corner. Unfortunately, this Islamic celebration has lost its beautiful favor in Gaza because almost all the markets, all the commercial centers are almost empty because no one's there shopping. Most of the markets have no goods because most of the goods are coming through the tunnels, which is extremely expensive and hardly anyone can afford it. At the same time, almost 80% of the Palestinians now have been brought into aid food dependency, with most of the Palestinians, or Gaza stands on 65% of unemployment. Even those Palestinians who have been employed and should have regular salaries, most of their salaries are withheld on the Israeli side. However, one of the most outrageous attacks on the Palestinians was the brutal war that was on the final days of the last year and the beginnings of this year. In a month's time, the Palestinians will commemorate the 23 war, that those tragic 23 days, what's been so called Operation Cast Lead, which started with aerial and naval bombardment and then followed by a ground invasion. Several international organizations, weapon experts, medical staff have documented and announced that the Israelis and the Israeli army force have used extremely deadly and internationally prohibited weapons like the dime and the white phosphorus. This war has resulted in killing over 1,400 Palestinians in less than 20 days. 14% of those people who were killed were women. 24% of them, almost quarter of them, were children. So I don't know what fighters they were talking about. And this barbaric attack has caused Gaza direct losses of over $2 billion. However, the fear and the worry that we lived during that war is nothing compared to the tragic and the drastic scenes of Gaza just after the war. I'll never forget the days after the war when I was walking around the streets for hours and hours, just walking from one house to another, looking what happened. It was quite impossible just to walk for a few meters without seeing a house, a clinic, a mosque, a public service building without being partially or completely destroyed. I remember the image of the civil defense worker running from one house to another, just trying to find who's ever still alive, or just trying to find more bodies. I still do remember the days when I went to my university just the day after the war. I was a teaching assistant at the Islamic University of Gaza, and when I went inside, I was shocked to see the two buildings of the science and engineering buildings, which I spent almost 5 years of my life studying and then teaching on those buildings, were completely destroyed. Or one of them was completely destroyed, flattened to the ground. The other one was like almost completely destroyed. I was walking around just trying to find a desk, trying to save whatever is left behind, a desk, a computer, or even exam papers being scattered all over the place. I could hardly find at those days, especially the first week after the end of the war, I could hardly find a house where there's no people killed in that house, or no family members or friends. So it was like funerals all over Gaza in 2 months' time after the war. The war in Gaza has left horrific stories that children are still talking about till this day. Hundreds of families were forced to stay in their houses and then being assassinated by the Israeli forces. A lot of children have witnessed their parents being killed and have to stay beside their bodies for days. I still remember those horrific stories, which I can't tell in here because it's really horrific stories, and I don't know where to start if I want to start saying those stories. And those stories we were listening to during the radio because we don't have electricity at that time, and we kept more stories were coming up after the war. A lot of young teenagers, a lot of children have suffered from scars and burns because of the white phosphorus that the Israelis used during the war, and still suffering from those scars. There are absolutely no words enough to describe what happened in Gaza during that war. However, this does not necessarily mean that I lived a life full of misery and pain. I still do appreciate every single moment I lived in Gaza. Living in such conflict place taught me the meaning of life as everyone else should understand. I have learned how to appreciate things that others take as granted in life. The beautiful moment I spend in my house with my family, when there is no electricity, no TV, no internet, or no computers, under the lights of candles, just talking and laughing, those moments were some of the best moments I had in my life, and still do remember it so far. Just living in such a place helped me to appreciate things others take as granted in their life, like electricity or water, or like living in peace. or living in prosperity, or like enjoying the basic amenities of life. You learn when you live in Gaza the value of clean drinking water, and you don't learn such thing only when you're deprived of it. You learn the peace and prosperity, and you learn to appreciate the meanings of the words like peace and prosperity only when you only hear those words on the news. And I reasonably assume most students in Gaza and young generations are mature enough and are aware of the political situation in there, what's happening around them in Gaza, in Palestine in general, and the whole world. And they are responsible enough to take the responsibility and to make a change in the Middle East area, and to take the whole situation into a near solution. I'm really sorry if I took much of your time, but it's really important to stress the tragic and the drastic situation that a lot of Palestinians are living in Gaza. This war and this siege has left the Palestinians emotionally exhausted. The daily suffering of the Palestinians will definitely need time to heal, but still, some scars will never heal, unfortunately. The Israelis should understand that the lack of security and the occupation are two sides of the same coin. I can speak on behalf of the Palestinians when saying that we all seek peace in the Middle East area, but not the kind of peace that strips us from our legitimate rights of living in peace and prosperity. Several peace groups and organizations, including One Voice and the University of Tel Aviv, conducted surveys amongst the Palestinians and the Israelis, and concluded that over 70% of them, 70% of both sides, are supporting the two-state solutions. So we are seeking the UK and the international community support and efforts to exercise more pressure on the Israeli government in order to make concessions and reach a fair compromise. So why should we be the only one to make compromises and accepting the phenomenon as might is right? It's only by the international pressure can this inhuman siege on Gaza be broken. Throughout the history, all past dictatorships have fallen only because of the international joint effort and the responsibility that governments like the UK have endorsed. The British people have shown tremendous support to the Palestinian rights and astonishing support during the war. Needless to say, the impressive efforts and campaigns and convoys that brought in the siege several times and came into Gaza to show support and solidarity. To all those courageous men and women, on behalf of all Palestinians, I pay deep respect and convey the message of peace and love, and the gratitude, of course. I'm really grateful that I've been given the ground to speak in front of you today and share some of my friends' and family's stories in Gaza. I sincerely hope this effort will help the Palestinians turn this tiny ray of hope and peace, prosperity into a shining star. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Ayman. I think when we hear what Ayman has to say, and thank you for reminding us of the big demonstrations that we did get out on the streets in January. Yeah. But what's very